Chapter 2 of 17. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jonathan Burchard, April 2009. 17 by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 2. The Unknown. He was roused by the bluff greeting of an acquaintance not dissimilar to himself in age, manner, and apparel. "Hello, Silly Bill," said this person, Johnny Watson. "What's the news?" William showed no enthusiasm. On the contrary, a frown of annoyance appeared upon his brow. The nickname, Silly Bill, long ago compounded by merry child comrades from William and Sylvanus, was not to his taste, especially in public, where he preferred to be addressed simply and manfully as Baxter. Any direct expression of resentment, however, was difficult, since it was plain that Johnny Watson intended no offense whatever and but spoke out of custom. "Don't know any," William replied coldly. "Dull times, ain't it?" said Mr. Watson, a little depressed by his friend's manner. "I heard May Parcher was coming back to town yesterday, though." "Well, let her," returned William, still severe. "They said she was going to bring a girl to visit her," Johnny began in a confidential tone. "They said she was a regular ring-dinger and—" "Well, what if she is?" the discouraging Mr. Baxter interrupted. "Makes little difference to me, I guess." "Oh, no, it don't. You don't take any interest in girls." "Oh, no." "No, I do not," was the emphatic and heartless retort. "I never saw one in my life I'd care whether she lived or died." "Honest?" asked Johnny, struck by the conviction with which this speech was uttered. "Honest? Is that so?" "Yes, honest," William replied sharply. "They could all die. I wouldn't notice." Johnny Watson was profoundly impressed. "Why, I didn't know you felt that way about him, Silly Bill. I always thought you were kind of—" "Well, I do feel that way about him," said William Sylvanus Baxter, and outraged by the repetition of the offensive nickname, he began to move away. "You can tell him so for me if you want to," he added over his shoulder, and he walked haughtily up the street, leaving Mr. Watson to ponder upon this case of misogyny, never until that moment suspected. It was beyond the power of his mind to grasp the fact that William Sylvanus Baxter's cruel words about girls had been uttered because William was annoyed at being called Silly Bill in a public place, and had not known how to object otherwise than by showing contempt for any topic of conversation proposed by the offender. This latter, being of a disposition to accept statements as facts, was warmly interested, instead of being hurt, and decided that there was something worth talking about, especially with representatives of the class so sweepingly excluded from the sympathies of Silly Bill. William, meanwhile, made his way toward the residence section of the town, and presently, with the passage of time, found himself eased of his annoyance. He walked in his own manner, using his shoulders to emphasize an effect of carelessness which he wished to produce upon observers. For his consciousness of observers was abnormal, since he had it whether anyone was looking at him or not, and it reached a crucial stage whenever he perceived persons of his own age, but of opposite sex, approaching. A person of this description was encountered upon the sidewalk within 100 yards of his own home, and William Sylvanus Baxter saw her while yet she was afar off. The quiet and shady thoroughfare was empty of all human life at the time, save for those two, and she was upon the same side of the street that he was. Thus it became inevitable that they should meet, face to face, for the first time in their lives. He had perceived, even in the distance, that she was unknown to him, a stranger, because he knew all the girls in this part of the town who dressed as famously in the mode as that. And then, as the distance between them lessened, he saw that she was ravishingly pretty, far, far prettier indeed than any girl he knew. At least it seemed so, for it is, unfortunately, much easier for strangers to be beautiful. Aside from this advantage of mystery, the approaching vision was piquant and graceful enough to have reminded a much older boy of a spotless white kitten, for in spite of a charmingly managed demureness, there was precisely that kind of playfulness somewhere expressed about her. Just now it was most definite in the look she bent upon the light and fluffy burden which she carried nestled in the inner curve of her right arm. A tiny dog with hair like cotton and a pink ribbon round his neck. An animal sated with indulgence and idiotically unaware of his privilege. He was half asleep. William did not see the dog, or it is the plain, anatomical truth that when he saw how pretty the girl was, his heart, his physical heart, began to do things the like of which, experienced by an elderly person, would have brought the doctor in haste. In addition, his complexion altered. he broke out in fiery patches. He suffered from breathlessness and from pressure on the diaphragm. Afterward, he could not have named the color of the little parasol she carried in her left hand, and yet, as it drew nearer and nearer, a rosy haze suffused the neighborhood, and the whole world began to turn an exquisite pink. Beneath this gentle glow, with eyes downcast in thought, she apparently took no note of William, even when she and William had come within a few yards of each other. Yet he knew that she would look up and that their eyes must meet, a thing for which he endeavored to prepare himself by a strange weaving motion of his neck against the friction of his collar. For thus, instinctively, he strove to obtain greater ease and some decent appearance of manly indifference. He felt that his efforts were a failure, that his agitation was ruinous and must be perceptible at a distance of miles, not feet. And then, in the instant of panic that befell, when her dark-lashed eyelids slowly lifted, he had a flash of inspiration. He opened his mouth somewhat, and as her eyes met his, full and startlingly, he placed 3 fingers across the orifice, and also offered a slight vocal proof that she had surprised him in the midst of a yawn. "Oh, hum," he said. For a fraction of a second, the deep blue spark in her eyes glowed brighter. Gentle arrows of turquoise shot him through and through, and then her glance withdrew from the ineffable collision. Her small, white-shod feet continued to bear her onward, away from him, while his own dim shoes peregrinated in the opposite direction. William, necessarily, yet with excruciating reluctance, accompanying them. But just at the moment when he and the lovely creature were side by side, and her head turned from him, she spoke, that is, she murmured, but he caught the words.
"You Floppet, wake up," she said,
in the tone of a mother talking baby talk.
"So indifferent."
William's feet and his breath halted spasmodically. For an instant he thought she had spoken to him, and then for the first time he perceived the fluffy head of the dog bobbing languidly over her arm, with the motion of her walking, and he comprehended that Floppet, and not William Sylvanus Baxter, was the gentleman addressed. But had she meant him? His breath returning, though not yet operating in its usual manner, he stood gazing after her while the glamorous parasol passed down the shady street, catching splashes of sunshine through the branches of the maple trees, and the cottony head of the tiny dog continued to be visible, bobbing rhythmically over a filmy sleeve. Had she meant that William was indifferent? Was it William that she really addressed? He took 2 steps to follow her, but a suffocating shyness stopped him abruptly, and in a horror lest she should glance round and detect him in the act, he turned and strode fiercely to the gate of his own home before he dared to look again. And when he did look, affecting great casualness in the action, she was gone, evidently having turned the corner. Yet the street did not seem quite empty. There was still something warm and fragrant about it, and a rosy glamour lingered in the air. William rested an elbow upon the gate-post, and with his chin reposing in his hand, gazed long in the direction in which the unknown had vanished. And his soul was tremulous, for she had done her work but too well. "Indifferent," he murmured, thrilling at his own exceedingly indifferent imitation of her voice. Indifferent! That was just what he would have her think, that he was a cold, indifferent man. It was what he wished all girls to think. And sarcastic. He had been envious one day when May Parcher said that Joe Bullitt was awfully sarcastic. William had spent the ensuing hour in an object lesson intended to make Miss Parcher see that William Sylvanus Baxter was twice as sarcastic as Joe Bullitt ever thought of being. But this great effort had been unsuccessful, because William failed to understand that Miss Parcher had only been sending a sort of message to Mr. Bullitt. It was a device not unique among her sex. Her hope was that William would repeat her remark in such a manner that Joe Bullitt would hear it and call to inquire what she meant. "So indifferent," murmured William, leaning dreamily upon the gate-post. "Indifferent." He tried to get the exact cooing quality of the unknown's voice. "Indifferent." And repeating the honeyed word, so entrancingly distorted, he fell into a kind of stupor. Vague, beautiful pictures rising before him, the one least blurred being of himself, on horseback, sweeping between Floppet and a racing automobile. And then, having restored the little animal to its mistress, William sat carelessly in the saddle. He had the guardsman's seat, while the perfectly trained steed wheeled about, 4 legs in the air, preparing to go. "But shall I not see you again, to thank you more properly?" she cried, pleading. "Some other day, perhaps," he answered. and left her in a cloud of dust. End of chapter 2.